Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Micah. Thanks for joining us at this session at the Indegene Digital Summit. This is going to be a panel discussion where we're going to talk about how things have changed and evolved in the communications between pharmaceutical manufacturers and marketers and payers in the U.S. over the last few years, how that's changed and where that's going into the future. I have the great pleasure today of having experts with different perspectives that are going to be able to share their thoughts and ideas with us. Jim, Gergana, and Brian, who I'll have introduce themselves here in a second, bring different thoughts to these same areas, and hopefully what we're going to have is a nice flowing conversation to talk about, as I said, kind of where things are going, and what might be changing as we move through the next coming 18 to 24 months and out into the future. So just background wise for me, I'm a vice president at Indegene. I work in the market access, pricing, and reimbursement area, and have done so as a consultant now for more than 20 years, and was in industry before that. But that's enough about me. I'll let the others introduce themselves. Brian, can I ask you to go first?
Yes, absolutely.
Brian Clark.
Yes, hello everybody. So I'm Brian Clark. I'm the head of U.S. market access for rare diseases at Chiesi Global Rare Diseases, based out of Boston. I head up the function, which is inclusive of like our national accounts as well as our field reimbursement team. Inclusive also of looking at pricing and payer marketing. So I've been at Chiesi going on around 3 years now. I won't go into the whole history, but I have experience within oncology. Been with GSK and Merck, as well as a couple other companies as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Brian. Gergana, can I ask you to go next, please?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the Indegene Summit, Jack, and it's a pleasure to be here. Gergana Zoteva. I am the Vice President for Value and Access Strategy for our oncology business in Pfizer. I've been with Pfizer for about 19 years, and I've had experiences across our health economics and outcomes research function, pricing, and global market access. And my responsibilities include overseeing a team of experts, as well as working in a cross-functional manner with a lot of other experts, including our U.S. Managed Markets organization, into the delivery of oncology medicines to our patients.
Great. Thanks so much for coming here. And last and certainly not least, Jim Ballinger.
Yeah, hi. Jim Ballinger. I've been in managed care pharmacy for roughly 33 or so years in various national and regional roles. As a pharmacist, I've been basically chief pharmacy officer, VP of pharmacy, other roles, largely running things like formulary management, clinical program design, contracting oversight, development of coverage criteria, and the like. And I've got experience with companies such as United Healthcare, Medco, most recently a smaller regional PBM.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. And the great thing about having the three of you on the panel is you all have experience with the same things, but from different perspectives and evolving perspectives over time. And that's kind of what we're going to be going into today. So thank you for agreeing to be a part of this and to share your knowledge and insights. I figure let's start with Jim. Can we start with just kind of setting a baseline for how have the communications between payers and marketers evolved, let's say, since kind of the start of the pandemic through what kind of the current state is today? What's changed?
It's been mostly, how we communicate directly with each other more so than anything else. It's, in the early days of managed care pharmacy, it was not unusual for managed care reps or folks to come into the office on a regular basis, bring people in from headquarters, those kind of things, to talk about new products or proposals, maybe even contracts. But with COVID, that all shut down. And so basically, you still had the same relationship in many cases. You still had similar contacts. You knew people, and that helped with the transition. But the in-person stuff dried up. Now, at the same time, we saw an explosion of a lot of these online platforms, Teams and, who else, WebEx, etc., that took the place of in-person communication. So everything sort of shifted to that. And that's worked out fine for the most part. I don't think that's caused a lot of hardship, and it's probably saved a lot of money in pharma budgets. But I think when we look back at COVID, that'll be a minor piece of it. I think what COVID has done is had us look at how we do business, and can we pick it up?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit, Jim, about how the one thing is the vehicle for the communication. The other thing is the content. Has the content really changed or evolved? I mean, is it different than it used to be, or is it more or less the same kind of stuff?
I think for the most part, the interactions have been largely the same. I think what people are doing now is they're looking at the opportunity to put this technology to use. And we didn't pay a lot of attention to that because, you'd be talking and so on and stuff. And now, I read an article not too long ago about telehealth, which is exploding. And along with it, there are new vendors who are out there trying to apply that to pharma marketing. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But, telehealth was an afterthought until COVID. And now it's not only applicable to, I guess, pharma, but, we're seeing doctors' appointments. We're seeing whole insurance plans built around telehealth. And so that's an example of what I was talking about. It's sort of this is a disruptive event. And, from that, a lot of new ideas explode.
Yeah. Gurgana, how do you see the evolution of this over the last few years, both in terms of, I think the vehicle part is probably easier to see than the content part.
Yeah, I would agree. But we're definitely also seeing evolution of what's happening on the content side. But let me first talk a little bit about the vehicle. As Jim was pointing out, COVID has accelerated what was a trend there, which was getting more digital and getting to have interactions played out on a digital basis. So we're seeing more and more digital platforms where materials are offered by pharma to be able to provide the customers with an option on-demand look, and so that they can really have the opportunity to visit that on their own time when they need it. So those are some of the changes that we're definitely, I think, observing, and that's happening also, I think, in the provider space as well, right? So how do you really navigate that huge field of information and make it customer centric and user friendly? I think that this is really some of the aspects that we're looking at right now. The content side, which is also quite important, I think that we basically are trying to work in a market which is becoming increasingly more competitive in every category. And I'm speaking here also with my oncology hat. The disproportionate number, I think, of approvals, which is absolutely excellent. The FDA approvals are oncology medicines. And so oncology of 5 years ago is not oncology of today. And we definitely are seeing how the market is evolving in many different aspects. And, we can probably speak about some of those in greater detail later on. But what I would really notice there is the effort that companies are making to differentiate themselves in terms of what they're offering, both as a product as well as services associated with the product. And again, on the oncology side, I think on the rare disease side, would love to hear what Brian is going to say about this. But we're talking about real patient focus, patient focus is critical because we're getting into personalized medicine, and personalized medicine requires a lot of different other aspects beyond the delivering of the pill to be able to work. And so could be the engagement, especially pharmacy, to make sure that that product reaches the patient, not only reaches the patient, but also that the patient stays on product, and so that white glove services and support and so forth. So I think there is a variety of different aspects that the pipeline of new products themselves are driving in terms of how pharma companies are trying to reach out to payer customers and work there. And then the last thing I would mention is, we've seen a lot of vertical integration on the payer side. That is changing the way we are interacting, right? So we're talking about the large customers are becoming even larger, and that vertical integration is also changing the dynamics. So I think that there's different nuances which are evolving the way we work.
Yeah, no, that's great, Gargano. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that the common theme here is the accelerated influence that digital is having. I think just across healthcare in general. We're definitely seeing that, especially when you look at the different avenues that we're actually using to try to get to different customers. I think within rare diseases, specifically, it's been one where we've always had to try to get our share of voices. Difficult to sort of get there in terms of with the larger ones, because you traditionally have companies of different sizes when you're trying to actually target different providers and payers. So I would say that we're definitely continuing to build up on the digital aspect of it, but also when you think about how the ways of working have evolved from the payers, like we were just mentioning, in terms of on their end, they have gotten very comfortable with what we've seen in terms of with the COVID. I mean, from 2 years ago, in terms of the those live interactions, yes, that they're no longer live, but what we're seeing is they've gotten used to the fact of it being virtual. They like that. That allows them to be more efficient to actually see more individuals from pharma. I think, which is a good thing. And what we've also seen is they behind the screens, like you were saying, as far as there's additional buildups and there's more consolidations and acquisitions taking place. So they are getting larger. So what we're finding is we're having rather than maybe one or two people that might have actually had a therapy responsibility or multiple therapy responsibilities, it's kind of being spread out, which is giving us more opportunity to try to zoom in on who is the content expert at that payer specific for a rare disease or other ones, because they're going to obviously have more time if that's more of their focus. So that's kind of what we're seeing, which I think is a very positive event sort of post-COVID. And in terms of with the patients, I think that comes into the aspect of getting information out there, which is I think we've seen lots of new websites being developed by numerous people. I think at that point it's a matter of, okay, which one do they go to? How do they become aware of it? How do you direct them towards that? Who's going to direct them towards that? Same thing with the payers. They have so many different websites that everyone's trying to point them to. So I think that's probably one of the challenges that they definitely face is where do you want me to go to look for this information? And that's where it's our job to say, listen, this is what we've developed, or this is what we would recommend. And so that's what we're focusing on now, is trying to synthesize it and make sure that we can get the most concrete information and make it available to them, so they don't have to search around needlessly.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I actually want to stay with where you ended up just a little bit, Brian, and change up our order a little bit. Tell us about how you see the pre-approval information exchange, the so-called PI stuff, fitting into that, because that as a structure is relatively new and is being revised in a way that I think is going to make people more comfortable with using it. But from the things that I've seen published by AMCP and from the payers that we talk to, it's still not used as extensively as you might think. How's that going to change things?
Yeah, I think that, again, it plays into the digital aspect as well as, their timing. So, I mean, sort of post, COVID, we're looking at it in a different way because, before COVID, it was where, they had less time, to sort of, meet with, I would say, certain, companies, and depending on the drug, in terms of like the PI deck in particular. But, that particular option actually, provides them with a lot of information. So what we're actually, anticipating is that's going to change now that they'll be able to see, more of the pharma companies and have more of those discussions and not actually have to worry about, that timing. Again, it's all about, the travel, and let's face it, nobody's enjoying getting on an airplane these days anyway. So I think that, just being able to, schedule those virtual engagements, on PI specifically will allow, the manufacturers to have those, B2B discussions, with, the various, teams, at the payers, and probably in that scenario have more of them actually show up, to the, the Zoom call or the Teams call, not to, prefer one over the other, but I think that it will be an opportunity where more information will be able to be exchanged with the payers, and hopefully that will be something where they will continue to increase and allow more people to come out there and schedule those appointments, because you take a look at all of the drugs that are actually coming up for approval into 23. There's a lot of them. I mean, from their point of view, they're completely swamped. So I think the efficiency of being able to use the the technology is going to be to everybody's advantage.
Yeah. Gurgana, how are you guys looking at that? Is the whole approach, the PI approach, something that Pfizer's embracing? What do you think about it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Jack. So Pfizer has been using a PI approach for a while, but just like Brian was saying, we've seen a real uptake, especially with a couple of factors. One is the digital way of meeting, the Zooms, the WebExes, the Teams, is allowing for easier scheduling actually, and gathering more experts than we probably could have in the previous times. And so this is really making the discussions, easier to schedule, but also probably more in depth, and an ability to follow up as necessary is there as well. So that digitalization, that again, COVID was a propeller. I think it's a really good opportunity for having a different type of engagement. Now, there's nothing like in-person engagement as well. So just I don't want to minimize that, and this is also really important and critical. We're just seeing, I was talking to our payer marketing team, they're just seeing the focus of this shift more towards like the congresses, like an Assemblias and AMCPs and so forth, where this continues to be a real good place to meet. In terms of another dynamic around PI is that we have been hearing for quite a bit some time payers saying that they would like to see information as appropriate, earlier on. This is that avenue, right? That is going to allow for the information to be properly shared, to be channeled to the, have a line of sight for our payer customers to understand what's coming, what's that new technology, especially if the new technology is going to be more disruptive. And so it's that opportunity to have a line of sight to get us to the right information and eventually decision points. And then last thing, we at Pfizer are really focused on bringing those breakthrough medicines to patients as fast as possible. So anything we can do to shave off the time to get to the medicine on formulary and to get it to the right patients, it's going to be important. And PI discussions are probably one of those avenues that are going to be allowing for that.
No, that's great. That's great, Gurgana. I'm interested in taking one of the points that you made a little further with Jim. Jim, tell us about how you look at the value of receiving information through something like a PI deck differently for a product that's let's say the first in the class versus a product that's the fifth in the class. How do you differentiate the value of what you're getting out of that kind of interaction prior to approval?
Yeah, it's we do look at it a little differently. I mean, like you say, if you got a fifth agent coming in, you already know how the mechanism of action works. In those situations, a lot of times we're more focused on economics than clinicals. But I think with new products, what we're charged with is trying to figure out how this is all going to fit into a formulary framework, and where does that product compete for market share, and with whom. If it's the first drug into a category, we may have had a lot of drugs being used off-label that we don't manage, and so understanding what those off-label uses accomplish for a patient is important for us to understand. But what does this new drug do that is different, and where will it fit within the clinical framework for which we've established our formulary? So the earlier we get that information, the more we can start to prepare. But the pie is one piece of it. The other piece would be, as the drug gets into the marketplace, how do doctors uptake the drug, and how does it perform? And that's where things like real world evidence starts to come into play.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to have the real world evidence right off the bat, but we do have to figure out where we're going to put this drug. And then as you gather that experience and you see how those patients do, the RWE starts to accumulate, and that helps you clarify internally where you think this is going to evolve. And so there are different pieces that we put together at different times. But the pie is an important part, and I think it will get used more. We didn't have a lot of use of it early on, but I think as we adapt to, again, the post-COVID world, you're going to see more people using it and more willingness to review it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, from the people I've talked to, from some of the research I've seen done on it, it seems like payers are more willing to embrace it than manufacturers are a lot of the time. The manufacturers are a little bit skittish about what do I put out there and what am I okay with, while the payers are saying, bring it to me. If it's not that great, I'll put it aside. I'll move on to something else. But I want the information, as Gargano was kind of talking about. And I think I want to connect back to what you were saying, Jim, about real world evidence. I mean, Gargano, I know you have a lot of experience with that. Talk to us a little bit about how the use of real world evidence is changing. I mean, especially I think of right now, and maybe this is a little bit off topic with real world evidence, but FDA is trying to figure out how to use real world evidence that's being submitted for initial approval of products, not even what Jim was talking about with into the marketing. So I'll let you run with it. I'll shut up.
Yeah, no, real world evidence is a really big topic, and I think that where we're starting to see that quite proliferated use and uptake is due to enhancements of the systems that are collecting this evidence, enhancements of the processes, and opportunity to analyze and leverage the data. I can briefly comment on the regulatory use of real-world evidence. Tremendous interest. And by the way, I'm just coming back from ESMO, the European Society for Medical Oncology Congress was this past weekend in Paris, and one of the sessions which I attended was dedicated to that topic. There's the excitement, but there's also the cautiousness about what does it mean, and how we can really take the time to appreciate where real world evidence can answer questions versus where it's not going to be at all substituting the need for clinical trials, randomized clinical trials. So randomized clinical trials, first and foremost, remain the gold standard for answering those questions about does the medication work, is it safe, is it efficacious. Real world evidence gives us the answers on is that medicine effective in the real world setting, and usually gives us an opportunity to see association, not necessarily causality. And so we have to be able to really distinguish what type of questions we're answering. So just to pick up on what Jim was saying, I think when we are introducing a new medicine to the market, we don't have real-world evidence with that medicine most of the time, other than the ones that we can collect through early compassionate use programs, early access programs. But those are also very limited patient populations. Most of the time, they're more severe than your general population, and the data that's collected is mostly collected for safety purposes. But once the medicine enters the market, we have that opportunity to start collecting data. And again, with oncology and rare disease, we're dealing with small populations, and so we have to be able to pull a large enough sample size to be able to give us that confidence. And we have seen a tremendous opportunity in the past few years coming through, third-party vendors such as, Flatiron, SciAps, Concert, Tempus in the oncology space that are actually providing those type of opportunities. So it has been quite a renaissance, if you want, or a new period for oncology data particularly. But each one of those sources has to be navigated carefully, and so we are learning as we go with those partners as to how we can leverage, particularly where its medical claims are not the answer to the questions that we're asking. It's in the EMR data sets, it's in the additional radiographic data, the labs and so forth, which have to be all combined into one data set to be able to answer the questions. Last thing I would say, for new products coming to market, we've received some really good guidance from our surveys of payers, both within the US and ex-US actually, that historical control or arms, or as you can, they're called synthetic control arms, with real-world evidence can be very helpful to contextualize the new product. So what does that mean? The RCT has pre-established, way of running, and pre-established data points and the comparator arm for the new treatment intervention. What the historical control arm or the synthetic control arm does is that it uses real-world evidence to understand what's the current standard of care does in that patient population by applying the same inclusion-exclusion criteria, or as much as possible, similar inclusion-exclusion criteria that are applied in the clinical trial to the real-world evidence data set, so that you're selecting similar type of patient population and you're seeing how are they doing on the products that currently exist on the market. So that provides that opportunity for payers and other customers to see that assessment of what do I currently have and how is that new treatment, new intervention going to eventually fit in that treatment paradigm? What does it bring new in addition to that? So synthetic control arms is really becoming an important opportunity for us to contextualize the clinical trial data sets.
No, that's great. Thanks, Brian or Jim, any other comments you want to make on the real world evidence front?
No, I think, just the fact, that we have seen, I think, significant progress in the last year or so, in terms of, the one area, which is that, taking a look at the, that claims data along with even the, the medical policy or the formulary data. I know that's, there's a couple big pilots that are actually out there right now that we're very interested in sort of seeing what that looks like in early 23 by one company. And another one in terms of with the EMR platform, being able to try to pull all of that information from that avenue together as well. So I think that we've seen, unrelated to COVID, but just in terms of the the digital evolution and just sort of getting the systems to talk to each other. And there are so many different systems, and we know different payers and third parties actually sell them. But I think ideally, especially when we look at the rare diseases and just all diseases, just being able to understand sort of what does that impact to the patient look like as far as from the utilization and getting into the costs, and then just trying to figure out what does that picture actually look like. I think we're definitely making a lot of progress in that area, which is great.
Yeah, that's great.
I would say that we still see a lot of drugs marketed on differentiating themselves from earlier efforts, and this goes way back, from a immediate release to an extended release, and we had a hard time incorporating trial data that would show better adherence or better compliance with therapy, and that's where real world evidence can sometimes be applied. because then you can actually look at how the drug is performing, outside of a trial setting and maybe draw some conclusions. So that's a help for manufacturers who are, trying to apply the same mechanism of action but do it differently. We've seen once weekly GLP-1s. We're seeing longer duration between shots. Nobody wants to get an injection in the eye, obviously, but if you had to have one, you'd rather have it every month than every week, or every 3 months if you could. So that's an area where there is some value to real world evidence to see if that does improve compliance or adherence.
Right. I want to shift gears a little bit and go back to you, Brian. With in particular, what I'm interested in maybe next talking a little bit about is the effort that you have undertaken at a real and established company, but in a new division of that company, in educating payers about diseases that they're not all that familiar with, that maybe they heard about or read about in school and have some kind of level of familiarity, but now you're going to bring them a treatment that's actually going to address what's going on in that disease. Talk to us a little bit about what that effort's like to try and educate payers in a situation like that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's one of those that when you think about it from the payers, we know that they have multiple therapy areas, and it's a matter of, okay, why should I look at your website? So I mean, that's why we have focused a lot of our digital efforts to make sure that we are building specific disease platforms on the products that we're coming out with, because we know that we don't have the size and scale to be able to go out there and necessarily put a lot of the the filters and pushing through the algorithms, but it is more of building a efficient, website that has all the core information that we know that the payers and the providers and even the patients, we're basically taking the information of what they've asked for and have built that, in 2 different, websites actually at this point. And, we continue to, have that before we actually, get to market, like with any new product, in terms of, making sure that the overall is sort of disease is well explained out there. And we do a lot of work with the patient advocacy groups. They actually, help with that as well, because especially when you talk about rare diseases, it's small numbers, of patients, but, it's important. The diseases they have, they're very interested and they're very engaged with trying to learn as much as they possibly can about what their options are, to get better. So, we work with them very closely as well. And because it's just simply the right thing to do. And along with that, I believe that actually helps the sort of the mechanism of getting the payers engaged as well. And it goes back to what we had said with the PI. I think it is part of that. Whenever we have those, that automatically triggers that after the meeting sort of activity, from that payer to learn more about, not only the product as far as, on, what different websites, but also within the literature as well as other, searches. So, being within rare and being within, a sort of a medium-sized company, we do focus a lot, in that area, and have been doing a great job considering, like in terms of the rare diseases, we're only 3 years old, but we're, building it and having a very good time doing it.
Great. I mentioned Gargana. Is that all that different than what you would say about how Pfizer's looking at a new oncology product that's going to be in an established tumor type, but is a new mechanism of action or whatever is differentiated about it, or are they the same basic things?
I think we're approaching it in a very similar mindset as Brian was just describing. And again, oncology changes so rapidly that I think the ability to kind of like digest with the information that's coming out on a weekly, monthly basis, as well as the actual shift in standard of care for patients that we're seeing happening. Maybe the academic centers are driving this shift much more rapidly than the community oncologists, but we're still seeing significant opportunity for continuing education as new therapies are becoming available, and practice is shifting, guidelines are shifting, and we want to make sure that we play our fair share in providing that information adequately and timely.
Jim, are there any what you might consider like best practices in what manufacturers should do when they're trying to provide educational materials to payers about let's think more about disease state, I think, than I'm thinking about individual products. To give context for the products, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some interesting developments over the past couple of years, such as tumor agnostic treatments and things like that we find particularly interesting, because our focus really when it comes to specialty drug management, and this applies to oncology as well, is that we're not in business to deny coverage to patients who need the drug. But what we do want to see is that, given the cost of these drugs, that the right patients getting the right drug, and they're doing it in a way that it's going to work for them. And so, when I think of best practices that I'd like to see from pharma, I'd like to see more work being done on things like biomarkers, companion diagnostics, things like that can be marketed as part of the drug launch, such that, okay, we'll tell you who's going to respond to this drug. And then we can worry about economics and some of the other stuff later. But I mean, it's, to me, that's where we are moving. And, we've seen some of it in lung cancer, GI, some other spaces where, we are applying some of those markers and mutations and so on to get the drug to the right patient. We need more of that. And I think that's the only way that some of this stuff is going to be sustainable from an insurance standpoint.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, if I may just pick up on this, Jim, I think that this is exactly the promise of precision medicine, where you are able to pre-identify the patients that are going to be best suited to potentially to respond to that treatment. And this has been something that I think a lot of the companies focusing on oncology medicines are going about. What is changing though, and is our learnings of how those mutations evolve after first-line treatment, after second-line treatment, third-line treatment. And so I think that the ask for pharma companies that I'm hearing constantly is, show us what happens in those treatment sequencings, right? So that you might be coming with data set that's in first or second line, but what happens in third line, in fourth line, and how is that a sequencing of patients and lines of therapy is really working out. So this is where we have some of our real world data studies really helping out, because clinical trials are not able to necessarily demonstrate what happens in those mutations that unfortunately happen to cancers in tumor cells, and that resistance to the drug builds up, and you have to address it and attack it with the next line of treatment.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I hesitate to go here, truthfully, a little bit, but I feel like I can't not. Everything U.S. wise now seems a little bit in flux because of the Inflation Reduction Act. What do you guys see in these early days of, is it going to get implemented? How's it going to get implemented? What parts are going to get implemented when, and where's that going to go? How might that change the way that manufacturers are going to have to communicate with payers? Is it too early to tell? Are there indications of what that might mean or where that might go? I mean, we all know, there's the inflation penalties, and there's the copay caps, and there's price negotiations, and those are all big deals in and of themselves, but how are they going to fit together? Or is it too early?
I think it's a little too early to make any, persuasive calls. I think that, where we have seen benefit design evolve over the years and how it has affected pharma. I mean, as they bring these drugs to market that, cost $100,000, $150,000, what ends up happening is, based on benefit designs where maybe a patient's paying percentage copays, they can't afford to get the drugs, or then you roll into the copay support programs, and the challenge I think for pharma is to align what their strategies are with those of the people who are, the plans, the patients, and so on, in such a way that they can get the drug, they can get the benefit of the drug, and there's no barriers to that. I think we're going to see some fairly dramatic changes in benefit design over the years, and also programming behind the scenes, that we need to do to take care of these new copay caps and out-of-pocket changes and some of the elements in the Inflation Reduction Act that are going to affect our members. And so I think it's a wise idea for pharma to keep tabs on what's going on here besides the financial impact that that's going to have. I think the other part is, how can patients get the needed treatments in that environment?
Brian or Gorgana, any thoughts from you guys on that?
I mean, I do think it is a little early. I mean, it was just, passed not too long ago. And, I think, what we've seen with anything that has passed in terms of bills, there will be changes, there will be revisions. And even when you look at, some of the details in terms of, not implementing until say 3 years out, and then sort of modifying it 4 years. I think it's important, to kind of look at more of, what is it that, is trying to change there, or what is it that we need to change? And I think that can only be done by following and also coming up with, ideas and working, with, okay, this is, into law. We have to work with this and trying to, mutually sort of discuss what makes most sense, ultimately, so that we can ensure that, the patients can get the drug, starting there, and then backing up and looking at, the copay caps and trying to figure out, what are the impacts of those new benefit designs? How many people are going to be in there? How many of those are, going to have, different, high cost diseases just in general, I mean, inclusive partially of drug, but just, overall healthcare costs. I mean, and it's a lot. So I think there's a lot of work that has to be done. Not only within pharma, but also, lots of other third parties to help out both parties, just better understanding, what the implications are, and ultimately trying to, keep things within reason so that, that it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah. And to jump in here, absolutely early days, and I think a lot to be understood, and I think a lot to be also thought about in terms of the design of the principles of the Inflation Reduction Act that applies to medicines. Probably the just thinking high level, the negotiation of medicines prices is the part that we're really worried about as being something that potentially can stifle innovation, because we're moving towards from a value-based pricing that we have tried to do quite significantly along the way. Now this is turning towards a budget impact, and like a price decreases that are based on performance of the product. So we're yet wrapping our heads around as to what is this going to mean towards our planning for future products, coming into classes where there's going to be those kind of a potential quite significant, possibly, price cuts. And so I think there's a lot to be thought about, and most importantly, I think the key for innovative medicines is to really keep an eye on how do we assess truly the innovative value of this medicine and the medicines and what they're bringing versus purely managing budget, right? So I think that those are the extreme where we shouldn't be going, and I know a lot of thoughts and minds are going to be working on this in the coming years.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, Gorgana, because I think you brought it all the way back to what I think a lot of what we talked about was about, which is how do you figure out who are the right patients to target? And how do you do that in the clinical trial? How do you do that with your approval? How do you do that with your prior auth or your re-auth in order to inform the payer and thinking that through? And how do you stick to, well, let's make sure that we're developing and delivering products that are going to add value for patients and along the way. And in my little summary of what we've talked about. I hope that's an okay summary. You guys don't object
Excellent
too
summary.
much.
Very good.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate you guys making the effort to do this and sharing your thoughts and insights with this, and really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks.
Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks.